Welcome to Brandon Hall Group's HCMx Radio, the only podcast in the HCM arena that weaves current market research, HR technology, and industry leaders into each episode. Our HCMx Radio host is our Chief Operating Officer and Principal HCM Analyst, Rachel Cook.
Hi, I'm Rachel Cook with Brandon Hall Group. I'm the COO, and I am the host of our podcast, HCMx Radio. And I'm looking forward to our guest today. We have Manoj Kulkarni, the Chief Executive Officer at Realizeit. Realizeit is a company that transforms workforce development and drive learning innovation for large-scale organizations by maximizing the value of training operations with their first-of-the-kind intelligent technology. They also have an adaptive learning platform, which is powered by a self-learning engine fueled by machine learning. Realizeit solution allows companies worldwide to transform from conventional one-size-fits-all content-centric corporate training and learning model to one that is personalized, knowledge-based, and performance-linked for every employee. And that is our discussion today. We are going to be talking about personalized learning and scale. Also with us, Dave Wentworth, our Principal Learning Analyst. He's going to be taking over in just a few minutes here and leading the discussion with Manoj, and also our Chief Strategy Officer, Michael Rochelle. I want to welcome all of you. How is everyone doing today?
Great, thank you, Rachel.
Great, and the discussion is a very timely one. Something that we as learning professionals, as a research firm at Brandon Hall Group, we've been doing a lot of research to uncover the nuggets, the insights, the bolts that make learning special. And this past year, more so than ever, every organization has had to go through a transformation, whether they liked it or not. And Manoj, your team has been well positioned to help support companies through this ever-changing, adaptive, challenging, thrive, whatever you want to call it. Everybody has a new way or a different way and different perspective of how they went through this year. What we like to see are those organizations that are still thriving, that haven't, they had to change their mindset, they had to shift gears, but they were able to do so, whether they were in the position to do so or they had to hurry and really get with the program and figure out what to do. So I'm excited about what all of you are going to be talking about. You've been working with our team on a number of different research studies, so we'll talk a little bit about that, or Dave and Michael will. And so for today's discussion, I'm going to turn it over to you, David, and I'm going to also sign off and lead the rest of the conversation with all of you. So thank you, and thank you to our listeners for chiming in. Have a wonderful rest of our podcast, and until next time. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Rachel. I really appreciate you letting me hijack your radio show here for this, because as you mentioned, we've had this discussion, myself and Michael and Manoj. We've had this in discussion in various formats over a different period of time, and we thought this would be a great discussion to have with more than just the three of us listening in. So we're glad that you're able to join us and listen in to the conversation. It's something that's always top of mind for us here at Brandon Hall Group, this idea of learning personalization and being able to deliver it at scale. And it really resonates with the work that Manoj and his team do. So it just makes for a great conversation for us. And that's why we wanted to invite everybody in to listen in with us. So with that, I think I'm just going to dive right in, and we're going to go ahead and
you're in good hands. I look forward to watching afterwards.
Yeah, it's gonna be great. So let's see, Manoj, we talk about this personalization, and we always think of it in terms of the learner experience, and it's something that there's been a lot of focus on the learner experience for the past few years even. But from my perspective, when I look at this, I keep seeing that the focus of that personalization of that experience has been very much on the delivery side of learning, and there really hasn't been enough yet focus on the content pieces. So I would ask you, is that your experience when you start to talk with companies that need help with this?
Yeah, I think there definitely is when it look in anything that I've done in all my life, words have meaning, and language, it has its own language. So what a word means to certain people is something that's always interesting to sort of discover. So personalization has that same challenge, adaptivity has that same challenge associated with it. But yeah, a lot of it has been in terms of personalization around the delivery aspects associated with it. To me, what's really important in terms of personalization and adaptivity, and that too at scale, is really around the content. Learning is deeply personal for all of us. It's a high stakes. It's high risk. We don't want to put a whole lot more effort, either as an individual or a corporation, in terms of putting people through learning. So the whole notion of what content really means in terms of personalization and what it means towards the individual and the individual's performance is probably more relevant from the standpoint of personalization. So the thing that keeps coming to my mind always when people talk about personalization is two things, engagement and relevance. And they're all both connected in the sense that, at the end of the day, people want to spend the time learning things that are relevant and meaningful to them, and personalization has to be able to do that. Is that a delivery issue? Is that a content issue? The answer is yes, it's both. It has to be able to do both in a frictionless way to be able to do that. So I do find that when people talk about personalization, they talk more about the front end of how people can use and interact with a system. What's more important is what's underneath the covers in terms of what are they actually accessing through that. And that's always about the content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. It reminds me of a lot of companies talk about this type of experience as the Netflix experience. And it's almost too parallel, because if you remember, especially in the early days of Netflix, the interface is great, right? It's easy to find stuff. It's all there laid out, but the actual content itself, there really wasn't anything good to watch on there when it started. So it really comes down to, does it matter if it's easy to find if it's no good? Michael, one of the things that you bring up in this conversation is companies will even maybe get to the point where Manoj is talking, but then there's the next thing, scale. And so I would ask you to sort of maybe help the people listening to understand what we mean by at scale.
Well, scale, just brings the level of complexity because there's more variables involved in the learning. So the analogy or maybe it's not an analogy, but maybe more of like a quick storyline is, if you were in an office park and you had a company of 4 employees and you were in this small suite with a conference room and you wanted people to know things about your company or develop, you could create an amazing experience. It could be very intimate, very personalized, a lot of follow-up, answer a lot of questions, do a lot of things, in the safety of your own conference room, and really create a whirlwind experience for 4 people. But what people are struggling with is we're not set up that way. It's not even, this is an issue even before COVID. Organizations are thinking of 4,000 employees maybe in several different states or different continents and different time zones. And I'm dealing with 5 different base languages and a couple dialects thrown in. And some people are standing on an oil rig and some people are in and out of airports. And, so when you start to get into scale isn't the personalized learning itself. Scale is the magnitude of your organizational structure. So it's personalized learning at the scale that you need to do it. And the elevation of that personalized learning to maintain that level of intimacy to the scale at which the organization needs to do it, that's the problem.
Yeah. So
can I just add one thing to that? If you talk about the Netflix aspect of it, and there's a view out there that what's really broken is the delivery experience. That if you provide a better delivery experience, that learning will improve. And it really boils down to, even if we take Netflix, for example, I spend more time perusing the inventory rather than watching something. I can't make up my mind in terms of what it is. So it really boils down to what's really required is to deliver what people really need, when they need it, for what they need it, in terms of doing that, and do it wherever they are. That's why the scale starts becoming important, because in the organization, people are all over the place. Learning is happening all the time. It just doesn't happen in classrooms. It doesn't happen at periodic times. How do you then continuously personalize it at the scale of the enterprise, at the scope and reach of the enterprise to do that? That's really what, the scale aspect starts to become important, because without which you really don't deliver the value to the organization. It's not about doing it in pockets. It's about doing it for each and every person. It's the individualization of that at scale that really starts becoming important.
And Manoj brings up an important nuance in scale. Is there's the size of the organization and the approach around that. But there's also saying, if I'm going to meet people at the scale of the organization, I also have to figure out how to slide technology underneath the learning that I don't even know about or don't even manage or work. That's part of the scale too. A great example of that is peer-to-peer collaborative learning is happening like, a popcorn effect every day. And part of the scale is it's not just taking what I know about learning or what I want to deliver as learning as a learning organization, but as I move up to the scale, I can't disrupt what's already going on. I can't suddenly say, thousands of employees learn through Facebook, or Yammer or Jive or some other approach. And now I got to pull them into my version of personalized learning, which is almost an exclusive approach rather than inclusive. I've got to have technology that captures, that kind of puts us, a web underneath that doesn't disrupt, but allows you to shape, measure, and influence what's already taking place, along with what you directly want people to know. And so that's another issue with scale that Manoj is pointing out, that a lot of organizations learning have a blind spot to, because they're not thinking about all the learning that they're not in control of or in charge of. A third area of scale is reaching outside. We know that over 60% of learning that's considered effective by employees, is happening with outside resources, i.e. learning that wasn't created by the company or acquired by the company. And so that's part of the scale issue too. As you start to rise to the occasion, now you're going to take into consideration people sharing videos and links and things they read and stuff they pulled in from the internet that they think is valuable. And how do you scale that learning? And that's what we call distributed learning. So you've got directed learning, you've got informal learning, you've got distributed learning. All has to be measured and managed at scale.
Mm. So, you bring us to an interesting point in this is, from a sort of strategic standpoint or conceptually, I think people are able to lock into this idea of personalized learning. They're able to lock into this idea of scale, but how is that affecting the technology decisions companies are making? So like Manoj, how are they either currently thinking about this, or how should they be thinking about learning technologies when they start to go down this path?
Yeah, I think we find, in our experience, we find two types of people who come to, it's really about the readiness of the organization and the people. On one hand, you'd find somebody who really has thought about what personalization means, what adaptivity means within their context, and are really looking to find the right kind of technologies to that. Or they're trying to figure out how to get it done through technology. On the other hand, there are people who sort of are wedded to the environment that they're in, but not quite sure in terms of how personalization really fits in or what needs to be done with it, and are trying to ask us from the standpoint of, what do I do with this stuff, right? Usually there is a context. Usually there is a value to be delivered. The first questions we ask with anything with related to technology, I've been doing technology for over 3 decades now, in business context, different business contexts, other than education. And the one question we always ask is, what do you want it to do for you? what's the job that it needs to do? Do you have clarity around the job that it needs to do? Technology is an enabler for something that you want to get done. How is this technology going to help you do that? I think that's where we try to figure out in terms of, from a technology perspective, and this has always been the case with newer innovative technologies, is that how do you go from balancing out the strategic aspect of it to the procurement aspect of it? The easy part of it is to go in the procurement aspect of it. I know how to select an LMS. I know how to select an LCMS. I know some vocabulary. I know some language. Can it do this? Can it do that? But I think most of the time that we find is the ones that are most successful are the ones who have a clear understanding in terms of what their strategy is all about, how learning actually helps them accomplish those strategies to the extent that it is core, and then what is the right technology set to be able to do that. We haven't found one environment that is similar, or the same. They all have, and the reason is not because of the technologies are different, it's because the context under which they are operating are completely different. So the purpose and the usage of that technology starts becoming really important to understand. But whatever it is, I mean, from the standpoint of adaptivity and personalization, we typically find two ways in which people are looking for. Either they're looking for a replacement strategy, which means I have what I have, I want to replace it. And we still ask the question, why? Why couldn't you use what you have? Or there's an augmentation strategy, which is, I think I'm missing something. Can this actually help me kind of close the gaps that I have? But I do see value in what I have and make that. And the answer usually is somewhere in between, to be able to say, what are the gaps that you're experiencing in terms of being able to extract value that personalization adaptivity can give you, and therefore what does the right technology set look like? Even in adaptive, and this is again a problem of language, is that everybody and anybody can sit and claim personalization and adaptivity, and it can mean different things. So what do you really want it to do? Are you more directed learning? Do you believe in learning as an employee benefit versus do you believe that training is really essential to your operation, that you can't put people on the floor or into their jobs until you know that they've been trained and certified? And the job is to figure out how to quickly get them and optimize the places to get there. So I think a lot of it is really when we come to people and they ask us like, do you do everything an LXP does? Do you do an LMS does? And we're like, we understand that those are sort of the bridges that we have to put in place. But the core is, what job do you want this technology to do for you in terms of delivering a value?
Yeah. Michael, you probably have done more technology selections with companies than anybody and walked through this process. Do you find that often that's the case, that companies come to this decision, this process with sort of a list of things that they think a specific technology should do, and they want to see all those boxes checked, and then then they start to answer the questions Manoj has after, right? Or are they starting to come to this selection process a little bit more from that strategic side of like, what do I need it to do? What do you see? Are companies actually making that transition?
Well, I mean, I think we have to preface every answer today with, and then there's COVID. So before COVID, the serial churn on learning technology that we've seen through our research. I mean, your research consistently shows, 40% of people are firing their learning provider, on an annualized basis. And if 40% of people are actually firing them, that means there's a bigger percentage of people that are thinking about it, which we're not even counting. I haven't found, that it's the problem of the provider. Because if there was a problem with the provider, then the provider would disappear. You get fired enough and you just go bang. But they seem to find other clients, right? So we know that it's the process of choosing technology that's wrong. And there's a whole host of factors. The number one is that most organizations don't leave themselves enough time to really make a good conscious effort at doing it. Rome is already burning and they're bringing a bucket, and that kind of truncates the process. Then there's the fragmentation of who belongs on the selection team and who's involved in the beginning and the end, the I gotchas, solve it. Then you've got the learning group that's more of a business unit. And then the IT group is, but you're a business user, but you're not a technical user. So it's also going to be, there's a whole host of things. The number one thing that trumps all of that is the lack of connecting the learning strategy to the business objectives. Because the concept basically is we have to know what the business needs to solve. That tells us what talent needs to do. That tells us what talent needs to know. That tells us what the content strategy is. And then what technology is supposed to do is scale a good process. And in COVID, many organizations are leapfrogging into technology being the panacea of incomplete processes, blown up processes, lack of competency, lack of time. It's a Hail Mary pass to say, let's go pick a tech provider to make up for all of these inadequacies. And the problem with that is it's the photocopier problem, which is a photocopier is only as good as the content you put through it. It's a thing to deliver, and it's tied to the quality of what's put through it. And so if there's varying degrees of how you think about content, and whether that's relevant, accessible to the learner, to Manoj's point, is just in time, just for me learning, performs, if it's not meeting the conditions of the learner, you could have the most expensive photocopier, but if you're putting stuff through that comes out the other end, you can't even read it. It's blurry, scribbled, like falls off the page, incomprehensible content. Or that's really great. You just made 100 copies of something that means nothing to me in my job. Thanks for putting all that content in front of me, but it doesn't help. That's the problem with the selection. So a group like Realizeit, what I like about Manoj and his team is they force people to think about the entire process. They start people out with, what are you trying to solve as a business? What is talent's role in solving that business challenge or opportunity? What do people currently know? What do they need to know? How fast do they need to know it? Under what conditions do they need to know it? And then slowly working through that strategy back to identifying what needs to happen in learning, and then how technology is going to bring the sustainability, reproducibility, and consistency of that good thought process.
Yeah.
And so any provider worth their salt today has to have that purview, has to have that consulting, engagement kind of product. If you're out there just peddling software requirements, you're not going to do well in today's environment, particularly with the COVID demands and VUCA and all this craziness. That you've got to be willing to spend the time with clients to think it through. That's what our team does, Dave, as you know, and that's what Realize the team does, as a provider. And I think that's why they're good at what they do.
Michael, just to add to that point, I think one of the things that's become really, really important for us is that before you start selecting technology, the big thing that needs to be done, and then we use this word more internally, I think it's becoming more and more common as we talk about this stuff, is you need to engineer your learning process. Your solution has to be engineered. So it's an engineering issue. What is it? What should it need to be? What's its purpose? How do you do that? The technology pieces should really be there to be able to enable all those pieces, right? If you want to do competency-based stuff and you need to make sure that people can actually perform in their job, and that's what you want training to do, but your technology only is there and your process is there only for classroom-based training, you're going to have a mismatch. So we always start people with the strategy, and then we sort of engineer the solution, and then the technology needs to be there to do that. We haven't found one, although we have a platform that is pretty complete and versatile in terms of what it can provide. What really matters is the solution that you're building on top of the platform that actually meets your specific needs to do that. Do you have an onboarding issue, which means that you need to get people into their jobs as fast as you can, but also make sure that they're competent? Do you have an issue with cross-training people? Do you have an issue that people are out today in a remote area and you can't access them? What are the specific problems that you're trying to solve? We've lived in learning and training in this world of a one-size-fits-all, right? Content is the only thing that matters, and people have to shape to the content. It has to be the only one thing that you do. But what we're trying to do now is really turn that process to say, at the end of the day, it is human capital centric. It is learner centric. That's the value of learning and training, to do that. So everything has to shape around that. The content has to shape, the technology has to be able to be shaped to the individual. And you need to be able to do it at the individual level. So there's a big shift in terms of how we are helping people actually change how they think about it, to move it from being more content usage and specific to saying, at the end of the day, it's about knowledge and performance and the individual's knowledge, because without that, there's no value of learning. It's not entertainment. It's not an employee benefit. You want to make sure that it's being used as a sharp-edged tool and not a hammer. It's a scalpel and not a hammer, to be able to make sure that you can surgically make sure that each and every person is able to perform in their job through your investment and their investment in learning and training. And we need to figure out how to help them optimize that. So, when we talk about it, it's not the technology. We actually look at this stuff saying, tell us your process. Tell us your entire process, because you know what? When you do personalization at scale, it is going to bring in some complexities, and you need to understand how to plan, schedule, operate, sustain, and manage, and actually deliver on these pieces. So, that's why it's an engineering exercise, right? Not just a technology implementation exercise.
Yeah. I mean, I think, what you've made clear, both of you, is, if I could just bring it back around, is that idea that the scale is sort of a double-edged sword, where you can't just have technology to solve for scale, because, as Michael, as you were describing, if your processes or your strategies aren't on point, all technology is going to do from a scale perspective is make the bad things happen faster and in a far greater reach. So the technology isn't the solution. So yeah, it's important to have all the front end stuff figured out, and then figure out what technology or technologies can help you do those things, rather than the other way around. And then I wanted to come back to something actually you said almost in passing, Manoj, earlier. We're talking about the personalization of learning, and it's like a thing that we create this thing, we make this personalization. But you said it really quickly. It was that learning is personal, period. That's the sentence. And that you think about that, even if it's a large group of people that are taking the same program, the same class, whatever it happens to be, for each one of those people, by definition, it's a personal experience, right? Whatever's coming in is how they perceive it. It's how it relates to them and their world. So why on earth wouldn't we want to leverage that to make that work, to make whatever it is we're presenting, even if we are presenting it on a quote unquote large scale, relevant and contextual and personalized to those people, because that's how they're going to take it in, whether you do that or not. And if it comes across as one size fits all, that filter in their mind actually becomes resistance, like, well, this doesn't matter because it's just bland and it has nothing to do with me.
It's not for me. It was designed for some other thing in place. So how do you make it as every person? Like we hear people saying, we want to create an experience that's edutainment. I think it's an oxymoron. When it comes to education, people want to educate themselves because they see a value in it, but they also want to figure out what's the optimal effort and time to get to that point, right? Yeah. So, and no one person is the same. We find this over and over again. Your motivation, your barriers, your challenges, they're all different in terms of, and if you put a one size fits all, the first thing that everyone asks is, what's in it for me? Why am I doing this? Is it something that does it look like compliance? It's a check the box that I need to do, or is this really going to be meaningful? So the relevance aspect of that is super important, because relevance drives engagement drives achievement drives performance, to do that stuff. So that's the chain that we try to follow in terms of understanding why learning being personal is so important in a workforce context as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So to sort of bring us to the end of time here, we're talking about it very conceptually and the strategy about it, but there's some sort of brass tacks, nuts and bolts kind of things to this. I think we all know that for a lot of organizations, learning technology as a budget line item is usually one thing. Just right there it is, and it's the LMS, and it's this big chunk of money. So there's probably trepidation when organizations start to hear about this, like, okay, how do I approach this from a budgetary standpoint? Am I looking to blow up the learning budget? How do I manage this? And you sort of touched on it a little bit, Manoj, when it was the idea of either starting over if that's what's required, or working with what you have. So maybe, Manoj, you first, your thoughts on how people should start to think about this when they have to make either budget recommendations or decisions.
Yeah, I think so. There are two questions in there, David. One is around sort of how do you go about justifying the ROI or even justifying the project, if you will, right? Do you make it about a technology obsolescence and say I need to do it, or do you do something different associated with it? And then the question becomes, how far do you go in that? Do you do a rip and replace, or do you do a, fit and accommodate in there and then grow into it? So in our experience, number one, the funding is absolutely important because at the end of the day, as you said, all the learning technologies don't get really, the sort of treatment that the other technologies may get. At the end of the day, I think it's a problem that learning has not been able to really explain its value to the organization in terms of what needs to be done, right? So we see a variety. That's why the question of what are you trying to accomplish is important, because it becomes not only a strategic discussion around it, but actually becomes a very tactical discussion around how are you going to measure success of what you're trying to do, and what does success need to look like for you to be able to get the value. Are you saving labor hours? Are you improving the quality of the output? Are you reducing the number of errors? Are you reducing risk? Is it tied to your brand value? Do you know what it means for each and every person to be able to deliver a brand experience, through them to your customers to be able to? Do you have an onboarding problem? So the way people are thinking about the budget for something like this is clearly around a value aspect to this. It's not about this is just the next generation and we should do it. In fact, we advise people not to go down that route. Don't just think that adaptive learning is just the next thing and you have to do that. You have to spend a lot of time, and there are impacts on not only the technology, but even the processes that you have to put in place, because you're looking at a data-driven approach. You're looking at a continuous evidence feedback loop. You're really using more and more machine learning, and all those have implications in terms of, now, they have huge value, and we help understand how to deliver on that value. So some people come to us with an idea about where they're going to get the value. In other places, we help them understand how to, really look at where this might actually be the case. But that is one way that is a consistent way they've found out that these sort of new technologies get the approval, that there is a clear ROI associated with it, mostly financial, right? But some other aspects associated with it as well. But the financial one will always trump it because there's a way to kind of pay for this stuff. In terms of how exactly it happens, that is also another thing that we talk about, the fact that we say, first of all, you have to think scale, because you're going to get the value at scale. But it doesn't mean that you need to start at scale. You can choose something that is meaningful at some point in time, but then build a bridge towards that scale over time to do that. And it really depends on the context. Some people are ready to throw away their stuff, but throwing away is not that easy. It does require a huge amount of change. So the big question becomes, how much change is any organization able to absorb it? And that's where we sort of look at the fact that it's better to fit in. We find ourselves doing more fitting into it, filling the gaps, but with an ROI associated with it, because that just becomes easier from a tactical perspective to implement.
Mm-hmm. Michael, any sort of final thoughts either on that, the budget piece, or circling back to any of the things we touched on?
Well, I think we covered a lot of ground in the short amount of time. I think Manoj made several important points that I think need to be reinforced, which is, and I'll state it in my own words, which is you have to start with the end state and work backwards. You just got to figure out what you want to achieve, and then work backwards into, how do you get there? It's a good process. The other thing you mentioned was that you have to think about things in terms of use cases. The idea of organizing a condition of the learner and as a persona, and then organizing what they want to learn and marrying those conditions. And if you don't do that, you kind of end up with this one-dimensional approach to getting to the personalized learning at scale. And really what scale also is adding dimensions, which is the complexity part. The third thing I thought he brought up is very interesting, is you have to think about what impact it's going to have on the learner. Are you helping them? So that learning in the flow of work, that performance related approach. It can't just be education. I realize the team has a very deep background in edutech, and we're not here just to raise people's knowledge levels. In corporate, they have to do something with it. It's not knowledge accumulation. And I think that application of, can someone put this to use right away, is an important aspect of the evaluation process. And the last part I'll probably take a little bit further, which is the idea that it's not about budget and it's not about money. If you follow Manoj's recipe, you'll arrive at return on investment. It's a value prop. If I said to an organization, you have a $2 problem, would you spend $1.50 to solve it? Most people would be like, that sounds really expensive. But if I said to you, you have $1 million learning problem because it's affecting productivity in these areas and causing all of these issues, and I can solve that problem by you spending $500,000 with us, someone's going to say that's a pretty good ROI. So I think Manoj's takeaway there is, we got to forget budget, we got to forget costs, we got to forget pricing, and say, if we're really well defined on the impact of learning not doing what it's supposed to do and its implications to the business, and get a handle on how much that's costing the business through either opportunity or challenge. When we go to work with an organization like Realizeit and they say, this is what it's going to take to solve it, I guarantee there's going to be a very strong ROI. And that's the business case ROI that a learning team needs to settle on and understand. And then take that to the key people that need to make the ultimate decision on technology and talk that language. Because you can't talk user requirements and you can't talk all this technology speak. The people have to say, what am I going to get out of this? So there's the learner needing to get something out of it, but the organization does too. And you have to speak business case ROI to do that. And I think the Realize team leaves a very nice blueprint for organizations being able to make a very cogent argument to the chief stakeholders of why this is going to be a good investment.
Yeah. So clearly we did cover quite a bit in just this short period of time, and there's so much more to it, as we all know. In fact, I think I mentioned at the beginning, but we will have some research coming out later in the year in conjunction with Realizeit on this topic, digging a little deeper, get some more stuff. So look out for that. I want to thank Rachel once again for letting me take over her radio show today and speak with you guys. Like I said, I think the conversations we were having, it was important that they weren't just happening amongst the three of us. We had other folks listen to that. So Manoj, thank you so much for your time and for Realizeit giving us your time. And of course, Michael, it's always a blast to talk to you, and I never get to see you anymore. So there you are on camera. So that's very nice. I appreciate that. And
thanks, Manoj. Baby did a great job, and we can talk about this forever, but I think we did a pretty good job in the time that we had.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
This hopefully is a good substitute for not being able to corner any one of us at a live event and talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
It'll happen again soon.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah. Good. Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you, David.
Yeah,
thank you, Rachel.
Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you on the next time.
All right, cool.
Yeah,
Bye now.